Opinion polls suggest that Lula, as he's popularly known, would win October's presidential elections, if, that is, he weren't in prison, serving 12 years for corruption, for accepting work on this beach house. He says he's the victim of a campaign to keep him out of office.
No, I'm not hiding. I'm going to go there and see their faces so they know that I'm not afraid, so they know that I'm not going to run, and so they know I'm going to prove my innocence. They need to know that.
His many supporters are still passionate about a man credited with lifting millions out of poverty, who left office at the end of 2010 as the most popular politician in Brazil's history. His Workers' Party has launched a new electoral programme to, they say, revitalise Brazilian democracy, with their jailed leader at the helm.
This program meets the demands of the Brazilian people, who identify Lula as a commander who will navigate this ship through the turbulent, stormy days that lie ahead.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show, where left is best, as it is everywhere else. We're broadcasting live from Brooklyn, USA, with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic, roaming the digitosphere in the ever-growing, ever-aggressive TMBS universe. On this week's program, Derek Davison, foreign policy analyst. We're talking about Trump's threats, a new sanction regime against Iran just weeks after destroying the Iran deal, plus a bizarre assassination attempt in Venezuela harnessing industrial drones. CIA, Colombia, false flag. We'll explore it. Also, we need to find out who is going to go into the gulag. And this week's gulag, as every week's gulag, is really something that exemplifies a broader societal and political poison. And, of course, we have an economic update from Griscom. We have a shout-out. We have a Brazilian Workers' Party that has officially moved forward with the nomination of Lula, political prisoner, and a vice president, Fernando Haddad, even as the United Nations warns against the austerity regime, which is rapidly reversing all of the Workers' Party's advancement in that country. It's a global theme, a global resurgent democratizing left, or global fascism. Those are the choices. All that and much, much more on this week's Michael Brooks Show, with an assist from DJ Danarchy, as always. And now let's start with where we got to start, and that is the new insurgency, the new energy of wildcat strikes taking place across the country. If you're like me and so many others, you saw this clip a couple of days ago and it inspired you. It's video of workers at an Indianapolis UPS plant. They're actually building a hub, basically. They're not UPS employees. They're contractors, as far as I know. And they're building a new hub for that company. ICE agents came in to target, or excuse me, not two workers were targeted
by their safety manager.
By their safety manager, and two workers were targeted by their safety manager, and this happened as a result.
Hey, amigos, get about this motherfucker. Y'all got him fucked up. Look at them. They sent a couple of them home. They all packed their shit up and shut this motherfucker down. Nigga, who y'all think y'all playing with? Mexico, man, this is what black people need to be on, man. I swear to God, I love this shit. They are packing they shit up and shutting this motherfucker, huh? On my mama, all that shit. They are not bullshitting. They packed up. Yeah, I see, it's over. Them motherfuckers now packed up and dipped. They thought they was gonna play with these amigos, and they said, oh yeah, we rise together, homie. And they leaving. And they not bullshitting. Take this in, man. Look at this, man. They shut this big motherfucker down today, man. We all going home, man. The SAs, look, ain't no grinding, cutting, welding. Listen, motherfucker dead ass quiet. The Mexican shut this motherfucker down, nigga. Said, fuck you, bitch. And Billy, see, this is what I'm talking about, baby. I swear to God, they got me here geeked up on my Malcolm X shit, on my mama, nigga. Fuck the bullshit, nigga. Look at this. They shut this bitch down. They pissed them off, nigga. And they said, fuck you, we out.
So that gentleman, Anton Dangerfield, is exactly right. That's literally what happened. The safety supervisor went and approached two Mexican employees, potentially Mexican-American employees, building the hub. As a result of that racial harassment, every single Mexican worker left. They dipped. They were gone. The project was over. And they brought a production facility to a complete standstill. They weren't unionized. They took enormous personal risk, and they acted in solidarity in the moment across all lines of risk and personal security. And this is the type of thing that we are going to increasingly need to see, and we will see by definition. The Janus case came down. Attack on public sector unions, which was confirmed by the Supreme Court, the Janus decision, allowing free riders, people to take advantage of union services without paying their dues. Mark Janus, a very appropriately named gentleman, is now a senior fellow at some pathetic think tank somewhere, taking apparently a modest buyout for being a scumbag and a scab. The attacks on unions have been relentless and sustained for decades in this country. And they have tracked with every single other indicator that we know is a crisis in the modern United States and in the global economy. Skyrocketing inequality, increased poverty, lack of access, lack of opportunity, degraded standards across the board, and corporate exploitation. Corporate exploitation that takes advantage of a contractor economy, which hurts worker union sort of unity, hurts efforts of people to work together and sustain bonds and organizations, because people are culturally trained to see themselves as freelancers and literally trained to work in conditions of no security and no long-term organizing efforts. On the other hand, these companies and these approaches to organizations have left themselves open to different types of worker strikes and worker action, because small bands of workers can, in spontaneous expressions like the one we saw at the plant in Indianapolis, exercise major chokeholds on global supply chains. That's the paradox of the modern economy. It might be weightless, insecure, and perpetually predatory for workers, but in fact, it's regimented, highly organized, and every second counts for a global corporation and delivery service like Amazon or UPS for that matter. So in order to break those networks and in order to sort of insert power in those institutions, there's many more decentralized opportunities than there may have been in the past. Now, obviously, wildcat strikes are an enormous risk. Everything from people losing jobs, losing benefits, losing money in the United States, to, as we saw in 2012, the Marikana massacre, where miners in South Africa were literally murdered by security forces working, perhaps very likely, at the behest of that mine's executives. Wildcat strikes are dangerous. They're also the roots of the labor movement. They're also the roots of the power of the working class, which Marx wrote about and focused on not out of a moral concern or a romanticization, but because literally this was the fulcrum of counterpower to capital. Your labor, your ability to say no, your ability to step back, whether because you want more hours, more money, or maybe you want to own your own business you work at, or maybe because you don't want racial harassment at your workplace or anywhere else for that matter. We're going to see more of this. We saw it in the teacher strikes that took place across the country, which went sort of across the nation this past year, but they actually go back to 2012. The Chicago Teachers Union strike was an incredibly important moment. And we ourselves, even those of us who work in different sectors of the economy, those of us who might not be in unionized labor or might not even be in contexts like a UPS factory or an Amazon plant, or being teachers as an example, we need to be thinking of different ways we can band together ourselves, and also different ways that we can proactively support and sustain workers that take that risk. it's a raw exercise of power for what's right, and it's the future that we're all going to need to shape if we want a truly democratized society. And everybody should just watch Anton Dangerfield once every week or so. Essentially, you could condense at least a third of Capital down to his monologue in that video. And I'm not joking. I'm being cute, but I'm not joking. Guys, go ahead. What do you think?
I just wanted to add one thing that was really cool about that video is that those workers, they actually got those folks rehired who were let go. So they were able to meet the demands, and the safety manager who participated in the abuse was let go by the company. So they actually won full on. I know Antoine lost his job. He did a really great interview with Jacobin magazine, which you should all check out. I know there's a GoFundMe to support him after losing his job. But I just wanted to tell just a quick story from my own experience. I used to work construction jobs. I used to work concrete when I was around like 17 or 18. And I remember on my first day, I went up to the site. And if you work concrete, you have to wear these special kind of boots to protect yourself from the concrete, which I didn't have, which nobody would have. And
nobody on the crew had them.
Well, everyone else on the crew had them, but I didn't.
Okay, gotcha.
So the boss basically gave me a pair of boots, and then yeah.
What's the matter, guys?
Yeah. Sorry, we had a little technical difficulty, but
no one on you needed to go to the boss to get the boots that you needed.
No, so I needed boots. The boss gave me these boots, and he said he was going to take them out of my paycheck, which was going to cost me around $100. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know anybody, and immediately everyone on the crew stood up and insisted that there is no way that I should have to pay for those, and that the boss has to pay for it. That was, an incredible moment of solidarity that was really instructive to me, because I realized very quickly, who was on my side and who wasn't. There's one person, my boss, who was the only person I interacted with at that point, who was taking advantage of me, and everyone else on the crew was immediately having that kind of working class solidarity. So it's across the board, and it's a kind of like natural inclination. It's something that we should, work to expand and to grow, because it's something that's really exciting and powerful. As Antoine talked a lot about that Jacobin interview.
That's perfect. We good now?
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is it's not nice. It's, I think, just something to note that the real world sort of becomes a viral marketing campaign for Sorry to Bother You.
Right.
Like, if you were to plan up a stunt that would promote that movie, that would just be that. And so, like, part of this is, like, what we have to do. We're going to have so many examples that elucidate, I think, in inspirationally, that we can use to highlight what we need to have done. And this was just amazing, because you could show that video to anybody and immediately they'd know exactly what's going on and how exhilarating that is.
Yeah, I mean, power is exhilarating, and that's a good thing. I think there's a broader effort here amongst in the sort of like modern iteration of the left that we're all kind of roughly part of essentially, I don't know, millennials, whatever way you want to sort of define it, of people kind of saying that not only do we want a sort of clear, unapologetic left posture and no more compromises on any number of things, from student debt loan cancellation to single-payer health care to totally reorienting how we do foreign policy and, all of these things. But that there's also this sort of, we actually want power. Power isn't just something that's outsourced. And power isn't something that's either, a sort of moral and character question, or power is not something that should only be sort of wielded by, these cultural myths that sort of power is either people who are really unethical and therefore they get to have power, or on the other hand, that power is like this grave responsibility of this sort of a certain type of elite, the kind of Reinhold Niebuhr myth.
That are super intelligent, geniuses.
Super intelligent, they're geniuses. They think so carefully, and obviously all of those myths, super intelligent geniuses from Vietnam to the Wall Street meltdown actually would be a good, pithy, modern American history. But and then there's this whole sort of like self-help culture that like, oh, people can acquire power through their own sort of like personal paths and sort of assertion of control over their own lives and private economies, which maybe you can at certain times to some limited extent. But even if you did have some real success in that regard, it still is not going to in any way fundamentally insulate you from the real power dynamics that are taking place in the society. And when people actually feel that sense of community, that sense of solidarity, and that sense of like actually exercising, no, we are not going to do this, or even just saying like, look at those guys showing that we don't have to do this. It's an innately exhilarating feeling.
Yeah, especially like if you plan to operate or exercise power for the people, that's exactly what you should be doing, and have no compunction about it, because democratizing power is the entire game. That's everywhere. That's right. That's you can just summarize it like that.
Yeah,
power is good.
No, without a doubt. And I'd also just like to add, in addition to like actions like strikes, one thing for folks who work in offices, white collar work, a lot of cultural work has been done in the U.S. to try to individualize workers. So, they try to make sure that employees don't talk to each other about how much they're making. And that's actually a tactic that's used a lot to really underpay folks, especially women and especially people of color in offices. And, really good kind of insurrectionary, tactic that you can do at work is letting people know how much you're making, because some people, have no idea what else is going on with the rest of the group. And, collective bargaining as a group, bargaining as, an entire industry, that's where we have advantages instead of these kind of one-on-one situations. And then there's a reason that, HR departments like to, sit down with people one-on-one for these kind of things, because we don't really know what else is going on in these offices. And that's something that we should be aware of when we're trying to talk about things like inequities in the workplace and pay discrepancies and things like that.
Definitely. The shout out is on a similar theme.
And we're back.
I don't know if this guy's going to be back too much, actually.
I don't want to agree, but if Anarchy could give us a shout
Speaking
out,
of Alex Jones being back.
Top of the line.
He's still selling his vitamins. So check his site today.
To the shout out.
Double down on the vitamins.
Shout out. Weird. I think that's creepy. It's incredible.
This has like a, what's that Eminem song that now, you know what I'm talking about? I'll find it.
This is out of control. Shout out. That's creepy. Shout out. That's weird. Shout out. Creepy. Shout out. Weird. Shout out. Crazy. Shout out. This is crazy. Shout out. This is out of control. Shout out. This is weird. Shout out.
I'm actually going to touch on this Alex Jones thing in a second after the shout out, and before we get to Derek Davison. But the shout out goes to the the Amalgamated Transit Union in Washington, D.C., local ATU local 689 for this. And now I'm going to be quoting from a piece by Aaron Corbett is this in Fortune magazine, I believe? Is that correct? Washington, D.C.'s Metro Rail system is considering providing separate trains for white nationalists attending the so-called Unite the Right rally next weekend, according to the Washington Post. The rally taking place at the National Mall will be held in the anniversary of last year's deadly events in Charlottesville, Virginia. The proposal would involve providing special trains to white nationalists on August 11th and 12th that would pick up at the East Falls Church in Metro Virginia and go to the Foggy Bottom Station. Once there, police will escort them to the rally. Members of the Amalgamated Transit Union, the Metro's largest union, leaked the plans and stated that it refuses to accommodate the hate group. Think Progress reported sources have shared that the ATU Local 689, that a hate group with Ku Klux Klan affiliation, will be provided private rail cars and police escorts to Foggy Bottom Metro Station for the Unite the Right 2018 rally, the union said. More than 80% of Local 689's membership is people of color, the very people that Ku Klux Klan and other white nationalist groups have killed, harassed, and violated. The union has declared that it will not play any role in their special accommodation. That's exactly right. Come out, protest, exercise your free speech rights. And other people will exercise theirs. And other people will show up with their bodies, their signs, their energy. And you shouldn't be insulated for your disgusting messages and poison in the public sphere. And I understand. I'm sure that the thinking in Washington, D.C. is that these trains provided to them will sort of deal with security concerns and decrease tensions around the event. But forget that. Let's increase tensions around the event. Let's increase every type of counter demonstration and other people speaking and voicing their truth against white nationalism and every form of poison that these groups represent. And that's a perfect example of what unions represent in our modern politics and why they are central to any kind of democratic, any kind of broad-based project that benefits all members of the society. I want to touch on this Alex Jones thing just for a second. I mean, look, it's hilarious watching a bunch of alt-right crybabies have a hissy fit about Alex Jones being pulled from these tech platforms. It reminds me of, I think it was baked salmon or Alaska or whatever. Some I don't even know what that guy's shtick was. He was gone pretty quickly, but apparently some other alt-right asshole. We played a clip of him whining a year ago at some parking lot in L.A. about being banned from Twitter, about how bad it was for his business. And that's the thing for all of these people. We have news for you. Yes, it is bad for your business. And yes, all of these modern tech platforms perform the functions of public utilities. So if you're concerned about protecting everybody's First Amendment rights and access to new media platforms, well, I guess you have to join the socialist position of reclaiming the commons from private predators. And then, ironically, once you're in the public commons, the First Amendment does protect you. Because, I mean, I thought you were all of the people that were sort of, I don't know, I guess it depends on the instance. Some of you probably just outright do support straight up discrimination. Some of you in the libertarian position would say, oh, well, it should be up to private businesses what they do, and the public sector should have equal accommodations. But, of course, we want to get rid of the public sector entirely, so okay. So being it as it may, in the world that you support and you want, you have nothing to whine about. In the world where problems are actually taken care of and we don't live in a corporate feudal state, you would actually have a legitimate beef. So I look forward to a lot of new content from Alex Jones on reclaiming the commons and talking to various socialists, public utilities activists, and people who really want to make sure that there isn't a stranglehold by the big five tech companies on the future of communication, entertainment, politics, and distribution. I will cross my fingers on that one, but expect to see more colloidal silver in the meantime.
Yeah, it goes without saying that I'm not, I don't want a First Amendment solution. I don't want to infringe on the First Amendment, but that's not what we're talking about.
We're not talking about the First Amendment.
And
you want to talk about the First Amendment, socialize Facebook, dude.
And
then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you'll go to the gulag, but you could still say what you want on
If
Facebook.
you have a racist business, fuck your business. Like, you're going to destroy it. Like,
absolutely.
Fuck it.
Yeah, well, for once, let's let their fake logic actually apply. Don't they always say, like, hey, racism is bad for business? Well, usually it's not. But in this case, if it is, cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm shedding no tears. I don't know. I might be shedding. I guess I can still find my Alex Jones.
No, we'll still have clips. We'll still find clips. Dude, we will definitely still find clips for this show. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, there was some mention that this might be bad for archivists and researchers. I think that might have been a bit overstated.
That is the most beautiful concern troll thing I've ever heard in my life. It's like, but what about for the future historians in America who want to understand why Chobani yogurt made you bisexual?
I can sum up my discomfort with what's happened to Alex Jones in like 2 tweets. I don't need 24 over the course of like 8 hours. But,
Look, it's really simple. If you want guaranteed access to tech platforms, then support nationalizing or regulating like public utilities tech platforms. Simple stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have a real serious objection to dealing with Alex Jones. I've just been trying to talk to people and trying to make the point about how like the fake news panic and the way that, a lot of these platforms reacted to that wasn't particularly good for the left, and it is something that we should be worried about.
Of course, it should be something. No, look, these platforms
they're coming
are
for
not,
us.
They're coming for us. You think that these platforms, with their incredible, impeccable editorial values and journalistic integrity, are going to tell the difference between Pizzagate and covering, I don't know, even doing an illicit history on Iran-Contra, let alone heroin traffickers' relationship to foreign policy in Afghanistan? Please.
No, exactly. And so I don't think we need to frame it in a way where it's like we're raising up our, standing up for Alex Jones or trying to defend him as like he's the front line of an attack.
Alex Jones is the front line because he's the greatest broadcaster of our generation.
But it is something.
Fuck Alex Jones, but the implications are far bigger than Alex Jones, and people are going to need to figure out a little more ways of having conversations, I think, where we say the obvious, fuck Alex Jones, and then look at the bigger implications of what these moves actually mean for open discourse, and including, because even last year, even Facebook's algorithm move that they did last year, which didn't even throw him off, but already sort of tried to disincentivize certain types of content. There were sites that already had reported, like I believe Alternet, massive
and Counterpunch
dip,
as
and
well.
Counterpunch, and sites that, again, I don't need to agree with everything that's on those sites, but they are not Alex Jones. They are absolutely valid and important left dissent sites, and they were treated in the same manner as conspiratorial nonsense, and that will be what happens with these platforms. They're not going to tell the difference.
Even Tariq Ali of Verso, New Left Review, writes for the London Review of Books all the time. Pretty established guy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
he does. For anyone who doesn't know,
I'm joking. Total joke. That's pretty good, though, right? I'm going to get you in hot water with not only Richard Wolff but also Tariq Ali. That's my goal.
But he's had his videos pulled off of Facebook a lot recently because he's refusing to post articles or videos on Facebook now. If they're of political content, they're making you register as a political advertiser,
right,
which requires you to give them like your driver's license. I think even your social security number in some circumstances, which is absolutely bizarre to be requiring that for people to be publishing news and information. And obviously left-wing activists and people who've been around for a long time have very serious doubts and are very uncomfortable with giving Facebook all of that their personal information. So it is something that we definitely need to be paying attention to. I think we should be paying attention to it a little bit more though in our camp and bringing it up and talking about those voices rather than sort of dying on the hill of Alex Jones, because that's just like you're not going to convince anybody,
right?
Who's
right.
Like that's sort of
that's
the point
true.
that I've realized.
That's, that's totally true. You're definitely the same people who have just gotten literally knifed by private sector monopoly are going to somehow blame I don't know, Chinese feminist college professors for what just happened or some other
to help with connectivity.
To help with connectivity. Is it storming out there?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Wow. It's intense. I'm even
I think all three of us were looking out the window.
I think I'm even getting a flash. I have an obstruction, but I'm still catching some of the lightning in my periphery.
I've been very disappointed. I don't know how the storms are in Texas, but I've been very disappointed by New York thunderstorms. But when we get them, I appreciate them.
Yeah, they're nothing like. I'm sure they're wild in the Dakotas.
All right, let's do a little. Do we have for the pitch? Can we have the Patreon page up and the YouTube page up? Just so we have some visuals with them. So, guys, we continue to grow on Patreon. Thank all of you. A bunch of new patrons in the last month. When we get to 2,000 patrons, better and more things continue to happen. Although even now, with Woke Bros and everything else, we're already luckily able to give you more content than we had even planned a year ago when we launched this show. Next week's show is our year-long anniversary. So I want to thank all of you. Definitely become a patron today. You get a significant amount of extra content. You get Woke Bros with Big Waz and myself. You get the Illicit History series and idea primers. Everything from destabilization in Jamaica, Silicon Valley fascism, idea primers, people like CLR James and other important political theorists and philosophers, history of Kurdish politics, all sorts of things. I'm going to have to make a list soon. It's just a kind of massive amount of content. Plus a theory reading and video series that kind of cushions things as well, helps give broader context. The post games, which are really fun. You can call, you can participate. We play videos, we play games, we do all sorts of madness in the post game. That's the entertainment heavy ends of the tip. And of course, if you're at a $21 or above patron, there are sometimes twice a month calls with me. There's a thriving and active Discord community for the TMBS community, which is engaging in politics, engaging in community building, and just having fun 24/7, literally. It's an incredible group of people. Patreon.com/TMBS, Patreon.com/TMBS. And another thing you could check out is our new YouTube channel. We have just about 5,000 subscribers now, which is great. We only launched, I don't even know if it was even 2 weeks ago. But we have a lot of clips up there. And this is a great way to seed content, to grow the TMBS show, to let new people know about the show. I understand that obviously sitting through a full show is more of a time commitment for folks, and these videos give you a great taste of everything we're doing, from very policy heavy stuff, history focused, and of course we're having a little bit of fun dragging the worst people on the internet.
We go a bit more into the IDW here than in MR.
We definitely go into the IDW nonsense here than in MR, but we also go and more into foreign policy. We go more into kind of philosophy and history in some ways as well. One of the goals would be is if there was some like IDW twerp who started watching the stuff and got upset, but then actually let it go on autoplay, and they were like, wait a second, now I actually have a somewhat historical view of the world, and now maybe I'm actually a potentially interesting and historically informed person. That would be a great accomplishment for us. So go to the Michael Brooks Show YouTube page, subscribe, spread content that way. Become a patron today if you haven't already. It's definitely time. Patreon.com/TMBS. We'll be right back with Derek Davison. I love stir fry. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is Derek Davison. He's a foreign policy analyst. You could find a link to his Patreon in the show notes. I'm a patron of his show and all of the things he does. And you can also check him out at And That's the Way It Was. Derek, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
Just 1 second, Derek. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Can people hear that or no? Derek, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here, Derek.
Sure.
We're all
happy
good
to
now.
do it.
Okay. Let's start with let's get to Iran first. President Trump has, and don't you? You always feel like you're in a movie. At least I do, even when I still say that. Like I'm in some type of like really bad like 80s movie, and like Hulk Hogan has to save like somebody's daughter or something, and
or like a Fox TV, like a Fox drama TV series or something. Yeah,
right. And then like Trump comes out at the end, and he's just like, "Thank you, your country is very proud of you."
I do think he organizes his crises in a like May sweeps kind of way. It seems like he escalates these things and then ends them even though they haven't actually ended, in a way that you would do with like a TV show. You'd have a little arc in the middle of the season where the North Koreans we're going to go to war with North Korea, and then he fixes it and it's all over. Now we can move on.
Fixed it. He tweeted out just this morning, August 7th, if you're listening to this today, the Iran sanctions have officially been cast. These are the most biting sanctions ever imposed. And in November, they'll ratchet up to another level. Anyone doing business with Iran will not be doing business with the United States. I know, and I swear to God, we should have put this on screen. I'm sorry. My bad in the prep. But he writes, I am asking for, and he literally put this in all bold letters, world peace. Nothing less. Exclamation point. I almost feel like I could read that again. The Iran sanctions. This is Donald J. Trump, who once again is the president of the United States, and not to get like all resistancy, but I'm sorry, the fucking president of the United States. The Iran sanctions have officially been cast. These are the most biting sanctions ever imposed, and in November they'll ratchet up to another level. Anybody doing business with Iran will not, N-O-T, all capitalized, these are my editorials, be doing business with the United States. I'm asking for world peace. We have it up on screen now. Literally, the world peace is all capitalized. Nothing less. All right, well, Derek,
special boy.
I would elaborate on that. He's a special boy. I like that line of thinking. Derek, you and I might be accused of harboring some wishes for world peace. Is he helping us get there?
No. What's happening here is, Trump has been opposed to the Iran deal since he started running for president, at least, if not before. And he announced in May that the United States was going to withdraw from the deal, or violate the deal, if you want to put it in accurate language, by reimposing sanctions on Iran. And that's what he's done here. This is the first cut of sanctions. There's another, as he said in the tweet, there's another layer of sanctions that'll go back on in November that deals with Iran's shipping industry and its oil and gas industry, that will really be even more painful to the Iranian economy. This is probably, although the other parties to the Iran nuclear accord are trying to salvage it, this is probably the death knell for that deal, which means that the Iranians, you can basically, we're kind of on a countdown timer at this point, to the point where Iran decides that there's nothing left to be gained from remaining in that accord, and then presumably restarts its industrial scale nuclear program. Now, when I say nuclear program, I'm not talking about a nuclear weapons program. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. They haven't had a nuclear weapons program since at least 2007. But they will restart their civilian nuclear program, which includes enriching uranium, mass quantities of uranium, and that is going to take us back to a level of tension over the possibility that program could be weaponized, that gets us closer to the point where some kind of military confrontation becomes likely.
So why can't the Europeans initially were quite strenuous in their defense of the deal, saying that they were going to work to maintain it. Iran's foreign minister kind of was jetting around the globe to salvage the deal. Obviously, China and Russia are active trading partners with Iran. I mean, what are the mechanics of why the deal can't be salvaged because of the United States?
So the sanctions that the United States has reimposed, and the ones that it'll further reimpose in November, many of them are what are called secondary sanctions, which means they don't really penalize Iran; they penalize anybody who does business with Iran. So if you're a European company and you want to develop an Iranian natural gas field, or you want to be involved in distributing Iranian oil, that act, or engaging in commerce with Iran, will get you cut off from the U.S. market. It'll get you cut off from the U.S. financial system, which are huge penalties. I mean, huge kind of sledgehammer penalties for any company. And the degree to which any firm in Europe stands to gain from doing business in Iran is completely overwhelmed by what they risk losing if they're hit with U.S. sanctions and can't do business in the United States. The European Union and European governments have been working on blocking measures, which are things that in theory protect European firms from the possibility that they could be penalized by the United States, and in some cases even technically on paper require European firms to ignore these kinds of sanctions and continue to operate as normal. But in practice, there's no way that they can really protect these companies, and even if they think they can, the risk that they're wrong, and even if it's a 25% chance that they, only a 25 or 30% chance that they can't protect these companies is still too much of a risk for most of those firms to take. As you say, Russia and China will do business with Iran, will continue to do business with Iran, but they're probably going to continue to do business with Iran anyway. So the real X factor is Europe. And I don't see a way that European companies can or will be willing to stick their necks out just to get access to the Iranian market, which isn't that big to begin with and is known kind of around the world for its level of corruption and red tape and just a kind of an unwieldy place to do business anyway. So it's not an attractive market. Particularly, if you put this risk of huge penalties on them. Now we can talk about China. China has been the one big buyer of Iran's oil that has flat out said we will not abide by these U.S. sanctions. The goal of the Trump administration in November, when the energy sanctions come back online, is to cut Iran's oil exports to zero. That's why Trump's talking about these being the harshest sanctions ever applied, because even under the Obama administration, when the sanctions were really, they had a lot of international buy-in and everybody was supportive of this effort to kind of force Iran to negotiate over its nuclear program, they never got Iran's oil exports to zero. Now, China has already said we're going to continue to buy Iranian oil. We're not going to abide by this. But that said, the Chinese government is also in the early stages of a trade war with the United States, and there's some thinking that their purchase of Iranian oil could become a chip in that process, that if there's a negotiation that goes on to kind of get tariffs, get Donald Trump to pull back on tariffs, that could be one of the things that Iran is willing to trade away in exchange for, or not Iran, China, is willing to trade away in exchange for getting the trade relationship back to where it was.
So two quick follow-ups on that. I mean, first, let's take it from the U.S. perspective, your best read of what's actually happening here. What is the end play of the Trump administration here? I mean, you look at all of a sudden all of these kind of bizarre and disgusting stories of the MEK, paying all sorts of officials to give, lectures to them and so on. And maybe you could explain in a second what the MEK is. It takes a much more sinister tone, because it starts to look like if they're actually trying for invasion or regime change, is all of a sudden the MEK like the Iraqi National Congress? Like, what do you think that they're actually looking at a military scenario here, or are they just sort of, arrogantly thinking, well, if we really just put the pressure and the squeeze on them, there'll be some type of civil society uprising, which, by the way, my brief editorial, there's tons of dissatisfaction inside Iran, and obviously imperial interference will only undermine organic uprising. Right.
This is what I wrote about at Low Blog today. The end game, there's sort of three levels of this. There's the level that the Trump administration talks about, which is what they want is to force Iran to come back to the table and renegotiate the nuclear deal in a way that puts longer term and more serious restrictions on their nuclear program, and also addresses other things like their missile program, like their activities in Syria, their support for Hezbollah and other, the Houthis in Yemen, so that kind of stuff. There's very little reason to expect that the Iranians would engage in this. It seems to be Trump trying to recreate the high that he got off of the Singapore summit with Kim Jong-un, but the Iranians have never really been interested in meeting with the United States. Like, meeting with the U.S. president has been a long-standing goal of North Korean leaders going back years and years and years. That's never been something that the Iranians have particularly been interested in. And in fact, at this point now that he's violated the nuclear deal and made it clear that the United States is not a reliable negotiating partner anyway, there's little reason for the Iranians to do that unless they get truly desperate, and I don't think they're there yet. What the administration seems to be rooting for is, I wouldn't call it regime change because that implies a managed process. What they seem to be rooting for is regime collapse. As you say, there have been a number of protests, civil society protests in Iran, kind of on a small scale but widespread around the country, which is a new thing that we haven't really seen before. And they seem to be motivated by a general sense of dissatisfaction with the Iranian economy, which has been weak was weak long before the sanctions were going to come back online. The real has been losing value, and unemployment is still high. People aren't feeling the benefits. They never felt the benefits of the sanctions being lifted in the first place when the nuclear deal went through, and so they're very unhappy, and they have been taking it out on the Iranian government. They have been protesting against the Iranian government. The hope, I think, for people like Mike Pompeo is that if you turn the screws on the Iranian people, and if we want to be honest about this, that's what we're doing, is we're punishing the Iranian people and trying to get them to do what we want them to do by penalizing them. If you turn the screws on them enough, then these protests are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, they're going to be so big they're going to overthrow the Iranian government. That is, it's a possibility. I think it elides the fact that a lot of times when you engage in behavior like this, you impose sanctions against another country, you create a rally around the flag effect that tamps down public dissent and gets everybody to sort of come together in opposition to this their foreign enemy. It also glosses over the fact that if the Iranian Islamic Republic system were to collapse, what replaces it is unlikely to be a friendly pro-Western democracy with human rights and that looks like, I don't know, Britain or France or something. It's as likely, if not more likely, that what you would see come out of a situation like that after a lot of chaos would either be an atomized Iran that's at civil war with itself in multiple places, or some kind of a military dictatorship, which would continue to be unfriendly to the United States, but would not have the same religious objections that the Islamic Republic has stated many times toward the possession of nuclear weapons. So you could wind up creating a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Derek? Call him. Is it on our end?
Looks like we dropped him. I'll see if we still have internet.
All right, I'll call him right back. Do we still have internet?
Yeah,
guys?
It looks like we're still online. So.
Do we still have internet? Do we still have internet?
Have reached.
Oh.
The Davisons.
Oh. Sorry about that. All right, guys.
To help with connectivity.
Yeah, we're helping. Exactly. Derek?
The Davisons.
Oh. Yeah, play music for a second. Sorry about this, everybody. Sorry about that. As part of Derek's rider for the interview, he demanded more break music. We're back with Derek Davison.
Love the break music.
Yeah, I know. You're very serious about that. Okay, go ahead. You were talking about...
what emerges from the collapse of the Islamic Republic, if that's what happens, if what emerges is a government that's even less friendly to the West than this one is, then that gets you into the next scenario, which is whether or not these people are after a military strike or a war. There, you start to look at people like John Bolton, who, as you say, has this pre-existing relationship with a group called Mujahideen Khalq, which is an exile group that began as a sort of left-wing opposition group under the Shah, but has morphed into this weird right-wing cult of personality type of thing around its leader, Maryam Rajavi.
Sounds good.
And sees itself as a government in exile. Now, you asked if it's like the Iraqi National Congress. It's actually worse. Mujahideen Khalq fought on Saddam Hussein's side during the Iran-Iraq War. So if anything, they are less popular in Iran than the Iraqi National Congress was in Iraq. They have less kind of sway with the Iranian public. There's no way that this group could come to power if that's John Bolton's goal. And he said, I think, at their...
oh, man.
You okay?
Yeah, we're okay. Keep going.
All right. He
sure
said, I think, at their congresses maybe earlier this year, that the goal should be to end the Islamic Republic on the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, which was in 1979. So that puts us at next year. And if that's his goal, and if he wants to see MEK replacing the Islamic Republic as the government of Iran, there's no way to do that without the United States getting involved militarily and managing the collapse of the Islamic Republic and the transition to what comes next.
Let's talk, well, actually, just really briefly before we get to Venezuela. I've been saying and making the argument that, there's been a lot of progress made with regards to getting Democratic politicians, including, very right-wing ones, in the proper sense of that word, right-leaning ones, signed up for things like Medicare for all, postal banking, federal jobs guarantee, starting to talk seriously on the environment, these really important things. And I've been trying to sort of add to the mix a handful of things that we could at least start to itch on foreign policy, including like, the situation in Brazil against Lula and the Workers' Party and that sort of coup going on there. That's a pretty obvious one. At least putting defense spending into play. And it would seem to me that in some ways, like the idea of defending Obama's prime foreign policy leadership achievement should be a pretty obvious one. And I mean, on one hand, I guess, we'll in future conversations, we'll get back to the Iranian perspective. It seems to me that from an Iranian perspective, it would be completely valid of them to say, well, we don't care if the United States is back under rational leadership because you validated, in fact, the Supreme Leader's core skepticism about this very negotiation to begin with, going back to like 2013. Right. But, do you think that that's a worthy conversation, at least in Democratic circles? Like, you're coming on board supposedly with all these positions. Well, how about not destroying? I mean, if you want to just even frame it as, respecting Obama's legacy, and this is one way that we actually should respect his legacy, or at the very least, if you're serious about any type of even remote stability or progress in the Middle East, you got to try to salvage something like this and run on it and talk about it.
Yeah, I actually think that's a fair point. I don't know how big an issue it'll be in 2020, let's say, because foreign policy isn't something that gets a lot of play unless there's a real crisis. So we have to see what things are like at that point. But we've actually seen a lot of this. The Trump effect on the Iran deal has been to bring a lot of Democrats, even people like Bob Menendez and Ben Cardin and Chuck Schumer, people who were opposed to the nuclear deal, who voted against the nuclear deal or, took their opportunity to cast a sort of empty vote against the nuclear deal when they had it back in 2015. They have come to, if not defend it, then at least to argue that what Trump is doing is not appropriate, that it's I mean, a lot of times they come at it from the perspective of, I didn't support this deal, but we entered it, we're party to it, we can't just back out of it, that goes, that ruins our credibility. Right. That kind of argument, which is probably the best you can expect from guys like that, but there's been a lot of that. I don't know, I mean, of the really prominent kind of foreign policy voices on the Democratic side in Washington, I think pretty much all of them have come out opposed to Trump's decision to abrogate the deal.
Yeah, I'm thinking even more, potentially proactively, like, running on some kind of notion of restarting it or something like that, but we'll see. Do you think that Trump or anybody in his orbit has any visions of flying industrial drones at any members of the Iranian leadership? We have this incredibly, you can start talking here, but we do have some footage in the background for people watching that's courtesy of the Real News Network and VenezuelaAnalysis.com of basically footage around this utterly bizarre event in Venezuela. Explain that to us. So
this was a speech that President Maduro was delivering over the weekend and it was the anniversary of the creation of the Venezuelan army. And it's hard to tell what's going on. I mean, I don't know. I can't see what footage you guys are looking at, but the stuff that I saw, it's tough to tell what exactly is going on. You see everybody on stage kind of react and look up, right. And then his bodyguards come and surround him with what I assume was some kind of ballistic material to protect him from shrapnel. And then the at least in the video I saw, the camera, they go to a different camera that shows the kind of military brass and everybody on the parade ground at attention, and they all kind of break up and start running right. for their lives, basically. Right. And this was apparently a couple of drones that exploded over the stage area. One of them set an apartment building on fire. There was I think the AP went with a gas explosion at first, but there's too many witnesses who have come forward and said, no, there were drones and they blew up.
Oh yeah, we're looking at them. There's a drone flying into a building. There's another drone getting shot out of the sky. Okay. Yep.
All right. See, I haven't seen this.
Fair enough. Yeah, but no, everything you're saying is what we're seeing. Yep.
So it seems like it was an assassination attempt. The Venezuelan opposition and the U.S. government have suggested that maybe Maduro staged it himself as a false flag operation. I love the false flag operation. But he's blamed the opposition. He blamed he's connected it to Venezuelan exiles living in the United States. So far, there have been two groups, I think, or one group and one individual who've come forward and said they were involved. There's some group called the National Movement of Soldiers in T-Shirts. I have no idea what's going on there. I don't know that anybody's ever heard of these guys before.
We need to work on our names, guys.
Yeah. They claimed responsibility over the weekend, like they were the first ones out of the gate to claim responsibility. And then today, I think, I'm pretty sure it was today, a man named Salvatore Lucchese. It sounds like we're in The Godfather Part 3.
Salvatore Lucchese? That's incredible.
He used to be.
Do they even have casinos in Venezuela?
I don't know. He used to be a police chief in the town of San Diego, not in the United States, obviously, right. In Venezuela. And has quit his job and went into the anti-Maduro resistance and was thrown in jail for a while for his efforts. And he announced in an interview in Colombia, I guess it was in Colombia, that he was involved in this plot, and he was the one who I guess put it together along with what he's calling the resistance, just the kind of lowercase r resistance that doesn't seem to be a formal organization, but it's just kind of a collection of people who don't like Maduro. And
wouldn't it be funny if there was like a Venezuelan hashtag resistance? It's like, you're so stupid. It's just like, a little more. It's like these Venezuelans tweeting like, "Yeah, way to f up the economy. Oh my God, this guy's so stupid." Pictures of like Raul Castro and Maduro making out. I don't even know what the appropriate analogy is there. That'd be really funny. Yeah, why don't you go tell that to your Cuban paymasters, idiot? So
I don't have any
stupid.
drones, but I have an explosive hashtag.
Right, yeah.
Take this guy down.
An explosive. So, I mean, I guess one thing that I did note that was kind of odd, and maybe this has already changed since over the last several hours, but Maduro's initial comment, as you said, it focused on Colombia and then also right-wing forces in Venezuela. This is about one of the only times I've ever seen Maduro not bring up the United States or the CIA. And then later in an interview, John Bolton was like, "We weren't involved in it," and it was like,
right.
Even he didn't even say that, dude.
Not us.
Right.
I did know that. It's interesting that he didn't immediately blame the United States. I'm not sure what that's about, to be totally honest. But yeah, I mean, I think he's still going with that. He was supposed to hold a rally yesterday as sort of a, I'm not afraid, you can't intimidate me rally in Caracas, but he didn't show up. Like there was a group of supporters or depending on what account you read, public employees who were forced to go and kind of we're going to demonstrate and we're going to listen to a speech from Maduro, but Maduro didn't show up, so I don't know what that's about. I think it argues against the false flag thing, which I keep seeing people bring up, the idea that Maduro himself organized this thing to kind of give him, make himself look heroic and give himself a reason to crack down further on the opposition. I mean, I think if he had organized this himself, he would have done it in a way that made himself look better. I mean, I don't want to
looked heroic.
Judge how somebody
do a false flag to
responds to a life-threatening situation, but he didn't. He hasn't exactly covered himself in glory here. I mean, I think if it was all a false flag plot, he would have arranged it so that he came out looking a little stronger or tougher.
Yeah, I mean, I think from him, it's funny because to me, it's like it's it's really hard terrain because obviously we are in it. There's so many conspiracies across the board, and so many of them should be, I think, generally just sort of dismissed. This kind of false flag obsession. But on the other hand, it is funny that people are like, well, anything that would involve like the United States, obviously that's ridiculous conspiratorial thinking. But then this being a false flag could get like a New York Times article. And, and my attitude is like, I wouldn't, I mean, it crossed my mind when I first heard it. I don't think it's like a crazy thing to speculate, but it's also like not something, the double standard around that is bizarre. And also there's nothing emanating out of this that really, like, as you said, it doesn't really, the way it plays out does not suggest that. I mean, the bigger question I have for you, and I'm just going to run it by you and see if this makes sense. I think Venezuela is very difficult to talk about because, obviously people who, follow me and this show, obviously I comment very freely and widely on Brazil. I think Lula and the Workers' Party are beyond defensible. I think that they're actually, in some ways they're not as radical as I am, but I think that they were an incredibly successful social democratic effort in the developing world. And I think that there's no doubt that Lula's imprisonment is political and it's a judicial coup. And I, And I feel good about him and, as a leader, and to the extent I can critique him and Dilma, it would be from the left. I think in Venezuela, there were real achievements under Chavez. There was a real excitement coming out of Venezuela. And I think there was also the seeds of course there was authoritarian tendencies. Of course there were moves against the opposition. Of course there was, I think, a range of projects. I mean, some areas it looked like really successful kind of like cooperative bottom-up efforts, and other areas cronyism, which has nothing to do with it being a left-wing government. That just tends to plague a lot of places that have natural resources. Frankly, most places have, and Western interests in those resources, and Maduro has a lot of failings, and then at the same time, clearly the United States has been trying to destabilize. I think definitely supported the coup in 2002. And, Mike Pompeo, I keep making this point. There's nothing speculative about this. It was so ridiculous in the John Oliver segment. Like, literally is on record talking about regime change. And, of course, there are right-wing oligarchic forces in Venezuela that want to strip away all of the achievements. To me, it's very hard to frame without being an apologist or trying to make excuses for genuine failings, but then at the same time buying into this lazy U.S. narrative, which discounts oligarchs there and the CIA here.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think Maduro is probably the wrong guy for the movement. I think he's done more harm than good.
Right.
But it is difficult to criticize him too heavily when you look at the amount of effort the United States has put into destabilizing that country.
Right.
So, yeah, I tend to think that there has to be something in between sort of kind of blindly supporting what Maduro is doing, which is clearly taken steps to undermine any real semblance of a democratic process. And that's not to say that Venezuelan democracy was working or that the right-wing opposition has been, playing above board. But when you do things like lose an assembly vote and you create a new assembly because you don't want to have to deal with the opposition-controlled assembly, that's really crossing a line to me. And so, yeah, I tend to feel with Venezuela like the best argument to make is that the United States should just stay the hell out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Venezuela
right.
And its neighbors. There is an interest that Brazil and Colombia and the other countries surrounding Venezuela have in this situation because Venezuela has been destabilized. There's a refugee problem now. So, I understand the countries in that neighborhood wanting to be involved, but the United States has no business one way or the other being involved in this, I think.
No, I think that's the bottom line. And listen up, become a patron if you haven't already, and listen to Derek and I's illicit history of the United States involvement in Latin America from, Teddy Roosevelt to Trump, and the unending amount of coups, interventions, and undermining. And I actually have no doubt that as I've said, I think we're going through a much softer but still very toxic, version of the Condor years right now. And I have no doubt that, Correa is being targeted, Lula is being targeted, Cristina Kirchner is being targeted. What's happening in Nicaragua is very questionable. But at the same time, we're going to need to find, as analysts, I think we could say the simplest position is we oppose U.S. efforts in Venezuela, period, does not translate to defending all of Maduro's policies, or for that matter, Ortega's. I mean, I think, there's a very similar dynamic there.
Emerging.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, yeah.
And I think, because I also think what's upsetting to me about Maduro is I think not only is there the sort of, the democratic norms, I think that there's also ways in which there really were, I think, under Chavez, some very genuine successes in the sort of like bottom-up collectivizations of certain small-scale neighborhoods and economies and real participation. And I think under Maduro, that's devolving much more into like clientism than that sort of like genuine kind of bottom-up socialism, which, as I say, I'm not to idolize Chavez either, but I do think some of that was real. It wasn't all, made up. And I think Maduro's making it like, I think with Maduro, there's a little bit more of like a, just the, like, throw you some trinkets for the vote on Tuesday kind of thing. And
right. Again, I mean, he's done that with the military to a large extent. He's given away a lot of whatever value remains in the country after the United States is, and has been kind of bashing the economy, and trying to smash it as much as possible. What's left in Venezuela that has value, he's given a lot of that to the military brass in order to sort of protect himself against the possibility of a coup. So yeah, I mean, I agree. There's been
we facilitated
kind of clientism.
Yeah. We facilitated that, like you said.
Right.
I mean, so that's kind of that's a legitimate paradox. I mean, do you have any kind of final thoughts on the sort of? I mean, does the same logic though of our harassing Venezuela push Venezuelans behind him, as in the Iran example, or are we like, is this sort of drone thing like the signal that like, dude, we're like, the kind of incredible arrogance and overtness of whoever did that is kind of awe-inspiring. It's like, they're not worried.
Yeah, it's a little bit brazen, I guess.
Yeah.
Venezuela's hard to read because, in part because of the refugee problem. I think there's been so much movement of people out of the country, and most of those you would assume are the people who've been hurt the worst by the economic collapse, or who are the most opposed to Maduro and have the have turned on him the most. And what you're left with, it's hard to say if it's a representative group of Venezuelans that you can draw conclusions from, if it's just the people who can tolerate what's happening there the most, who have stayed. So I think it's a tough case to try and figure out, but I do think there's obviously the potential for that same dynamic to play out there, where the United States pushes and pushes and just ends up rallying people around Maduro. On the other hand, maybe there's too much pain and suffering that's already gone on, that the population has turned on him so thoroughly. I mean, his approval rating is now, 25%, I think. And that's after, as I say, presumably a lot of the people who don't like him the most have left the country. So maybe there's just too much that's already gone on there for that effect to manifest in that case.
Well, Derek Davison, he is a foreign policy analyst. It's at The Way Thing, and that's the way it was.
And that's the way it was. Got
it. Is there anything else that you wanted to, you write all over the place. I read you regularly. Is there anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, I've got a new piece up, as I said, at Loblog today, LOBELOG, on the Iran situation. I've got a little history project that I'm working on that's at a website called The Rihla, so THERIHLAH.com. It's a fun thing. It doesn't have anything to do with modern, all these depressing modern stories. It's about a Muslim traveler in the 14th century who traveled basically around the world, much farther than Marco Polo, for example. He traveled all the way to China.
This is all coded.
all around Asia and into West Africa. And he started in Morocco, went all the way to China, came back, then traveled through Africa, and then came back, and lived a very fast to trace his journey and write about it.
It's fascinating. Derek Davison, I always really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, folks. Now it is time. Well, first of all, I don't know what was going on. He must have been getting a call on the other line or something.
I was worried it was a thunderstorm outside, which is already dissipated like New York thunderstorms do.
Yeah, New York thunderstorms are very New York in a certain way. They sort of make a lot of flash, and they kind of bring a lot of heat and talk a lot of shit, and then they're done. I was going to say Low Blog is essential for Middle East stuff to anybody who hasn't copped that website yet where Derek writes for. Let us have our music, because we don't know how much longer we'll be able to play this music for, because we might be... Well, no, we're doing the Ghoul... right. Don't forget the reverse order, buddy. God, Matt. I can't be on top of everything when I'm recovering from a migraine. Wow. No, do that more. Do that more. And if you could get the story up on the site. This week is another edition of the Gulag. As we say, we reserve the right to change the name of these segments at any time. Although a part of me does enjoy how much it triggers certain people that we use this name. I'm not going to lie to you. This week's edition of the Gulag is actually, it's very fitting in a certain way, because it's more institutionally focused. So this is like an institution that we could scrap in enlightened society.
We're gulagging a gulag.
We're gulagging a gulag, precisely. This is a tweet. As those who, for a little context, there are wildfires raging across California. And the fire problem gets greater every year because of the climate crisis, which is because of capitalism. And people go out and they fight to restrain the fires, and they try to save people's homes and lives. And it's incredibly intense and dangerous. And this tweet was put out on the 31st of July by the California Corrections account at California Corrections. And maybe I'll just really spell this out. Corrections means prisons. Everybody knows that, right? Today, more than 2,000...
They're not fact checkers.
Yeah, they're not fact checkers. They're not volunteer coordinators, for that matter. Today, more than 2,000 volunteer inmate firefighters, including 58 youth offenders, are battling flames throughout California. Inmate fighters serve a vital role, clearing thick brush down to bare soil to stop the fire's spreads. And then there's a bunch of hashtags, including, ironically, Ferguson fire. But, all right. First of all, the idea that you're putting the word volunteers in this tweet is fucking mind-blowing.
They're not volunteer inmates.
Yeah, they're inmates. I don't know what was the trade-off.
It should read
solitary or go clear brush.
If I was doing the copy editing for California Corrections, I would have said, say, inmate volunteer firefighters, just to make the volunteer correspond to firefighters.
Okay, so we could do that. Would be the correct sort of pedant point. The broader point is, you really shouldn't be talking about anybody who's incarcerated in shackles as doing anything voluntarily. This is some footage from California of the type of job that these guys are taking on. And look, let me say this. I have no doubt, and I don't want to discount the fact that there might be a number of these people who are actually finding meaning and purpose in helping in this effort, which obviously is an incredibly serious thing. And everybody who's out fighting it deserves incredible appreciation and acknowledgement. But the frame of that tweet and the way it was put across, when it could just as easily be read as, we just forced 2,000 people who are in jail to go fight incredibly dangerous fires, and they volunteered.
Which means we didn't have to pay them.
Which means we didn't have to pay them, just like we don't have to pay them for a whole bunch of other shit that they actually do. Bet you people didn't know about the secret labor force in this country.
It's disgusting that they wouldn't pay them.
disgusting that they wouldn't pay them a full rate, and this better help them in whatever kind of parole process that any of them might have. It's a disgusting way to frame what they did. All appreciation, obviously, to everybody out fighting in that effort, but California Corrections, not just Twitter account, let's put the whole corrections institution in the gulag this week.
Not to be a downer, but I don't think this is the last we hear of correctional facilities using inmates as labor to fight climate crises.
No, this is going to be the beginning of a trend. There's no doubt about that.
It's also not the fact that the California Corrections Department has a Twitter account in the first place.
Right. Whatever happened to just being a proper, sinister organization?
Yeah.
I have to engage with our... Oh, God.
Yeah, and it's like I would love to see what kind of like off-brand PR firm pitched that account. It's like, you guys are like part of the community.
Every time I see somebody like local to North Dakota do something I want to criticize publicly, and I find out that they have a Twitter account, I wonder, like, why do you have this? Because now I can go at you.
That's Matt. It's like, I can't believe this fucking idiot has a Twitter account. I'm going to be at it for the next couple of hours. It's fucking awesome. I got tweeted at recently something that kind of pissed me off. Apparently, Richard Wolff had some of the Chapo guys on, which I take as terror of this segment that we do on this show now. No, actually, I take it as the fact that we really got to get in touch with Richard Wolff. But until we get in touch with Richard Wolff, the famed Marxist economist and host of Economic Update with Richard Wolff, David Griscom, our chief economist, will continue his Oedipal drive to dislodge Richard Wolff from his position, from his social standing, and from his podcast. David actually told me that. He literally wants the keys to the Economic Update. David Griscom, Economic Update. Griscom Economic Minute. Go for it. Guns out for Wolff, buddy.
Guns out, yeah. Yeah, so this week I actually wanted to talk a little bit about an interesting report that I was reading in the Washington Post by great reporter Jeff Stein. Recently, we have seen rents fall, but for the rich. And in fact, they have been rising from the poor. So to quote directly from his piece in Washington Post, since last summer, rents have fallen for the highest earners while increasing for the poorest in San Francisco, Atlanta, Nashville, Chicago, Philadelphia, Denver, Pittsburgh, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, among other cities. In several other metro areas, including Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Houston, and Miami, rents have risen for the poor and the rich alike. So I guess a little redistribution there. So it doesn't take a lot of political education to understand that housing prices and the housing market itself is in complete crisis. For years, city governments across the country have promised this kind of weird neoliberal compromise where they're going to increase high-rise, high-rent buildings, luxury buildings, basically, and that those will have effects of trickling down throughout the economy because it will make more typical apartments cheaper. Well, obviously that hasn't been the case, and in this, as this report says, I know for a fact about the situation in Washington, D.C., where you have seen a lot of these luxury buildings going on, really weird contracts between the city government and these luxury developers. And, all these buildings have shot up while rent prices have continued to skyrocket. And I mean, just to understand the context numerically, 20 million Americans renters are classified as cost burdened, which means 30% of their income is going toward rent.
Many of them even more.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And I'm going to get to that in 1 second. I mean, according to a Harvard study that I was looking at from 2017, almost half of renters, 47.5%, have a cost burden of over 30% of their income on rent. The majority of this group, 25.2% of all renters, are under what's called severe rent burden, meaning that they're paying over 50% of their monthly income on rent. Now, it doesn't take a lot to understand how this is a huge problem, and for more context, this is obviously a racial issue too. Black households have the highest burden at 54.7% of renters have a cost burden, and Hispanic households are at 53.7%, so just right behind there. So how do we get there? And, we'd like to take a little bit more structural Marxist view of this problem. A lot of people try to look at it as like a supply problem where there's not enough housing and that's why rent prices are up. That's not the case at all. The reason that we have this problem is because of the way that we treat housing. It's a tension between use value and exchange value. So just to explain those Marxist concepts to you, a use value is when you use something. So if you live in a house, right, that's a use value. If you use it to protect your family for shelter, that's a use value. If you use it to store things, that's a use value. And exchange value is how you exchange it on the market, right? And that's the price that you get for it. Now, we've seen over the past 20, 30 years, there has been a huge explosion in speculation in the real estate market. Now, you don't have to be an economic historian to remember that that was a big part of 2008. And we've seen since deregulation in the 80s that the financial products that are actually tied to the housing markets have exploded. So we have all these kind of derivatives and swaps and equity firms that own majority of the housing and new apartments that are going up, especially in places like New York City. An incredible amount of new apartments in New York City are owned by these equity firms, which caused a lot of problems in 2008, 2009 when these apartment buildings were becoming foreclosed on. Because the question is, who do you call if it's just some kind of strange, dark equity firm that owns these housing? So we need to really start talking about seriously. This is a structural deficiency in our system, and we could talk about kind of things that we can alleviate the tension when it comes to housing, and those can be things like rent control. Those can be things like building co-op housing. Those can be things like social housing. But as long as the financial markets are basically able to profit off of wild speculation on housing, we're going to see those values continue to jump, because all social housing, all housing in our system today is all being speculated on the potential price that it could be sold for in the future. And the fact that people are living in there temporarily, people are renting it, doesn't really matter to the financial system. So that's always going to push the prices of rental housing up. And until we start to really address that problem, kind of weird solutions like these neoliberal solutions building luxury housing with mixed income housing units are going to fail, especially when, by the way, just to point out, when a lot of these mixed housing units have ridiculous concepts of what an affordable apartment is. I mean, you should see, especially I know in Crown Heights, this was a big problem when they were trying to build in the Bedford Armory. They were talking something around, affordable housing was affordable housing for $120,000 household income. And if you know Crown Heights at all, that was an absolutely ridiculous concept for affordable housing. Right. So we're going to continue to see, unfortunately, these kind of issues until we start to really talk about this fundamental contradiction of the market. Which is that housing prices are determined by their exchange value and not their use value and their social good. And obviously, this is something that we definitely need to be talking about more as socialists.
And we need to also, Kentucky Fried Comrade last week drew our attention in the post game. I don't have the information in front of me, unfortunately, but the ballot initiative in California to allow for rent control again, that's vital on a legislative front. This is another area, frankly, that people I think are going to need to look at in terms of going back to the opening of the show. Renter strikes, using that capital power, obviously in some cases to deal with particularly pernicious and oppressive and brutal landlords, but also just more generally restructuring the game on behalf of those who are renters, and in fact, indeed, in some cases, buyers, than speculators and exploiters. On another end, this just in. Use and exchange value. Wow. Look at the brains on David. You a smart motherfucker, David. Where you learn that shit? Toodaloo, Dick Wolff. Apparently, Richard Wolff now paraphrasing Samuel L. Jackson lines from Pulp Fiction. This is getting very scary.
It was my mother called me the other day, and she watches the show every once in a while. Yeah. She had just caught it for the first time.
Once in a while, excuse me.
She was like, who is this Dick Wolff? What did you do to this? Why is this man so angry at you? I don't know, Mom, but I'm really scared.
Say what again? Do they have use value and what? I don't know. Matt went really brutal last week with the David Harvey stuff. I think that escalated it to a whole other level, frankly.
David Harvey's the metal. He's the
David Harvey's the metal?
David Harvey's the Dimmu Borgir of Marxist economists. I don't know how many people are going to get that.
I'm shocked.
Probably
that
very small number.
It's fine.
Who
Whatever,
would win?
really.
Who would win? David Harvey or Richard Wolff street fight?
Harvey.
I mean,
I don't know, man. Dick Wolff is from New York. I don't know, man. That's going to be pretty. That's a brutal fight right there. This is when I am going to have to actually exercise a little bit of editorial discretion and say it would be a draw. Shut the fuck up, guys. It would be brutal. No, they're like the perfect yin and yang of like. It's sort of like if you thought for a minute that basically like there were three figures who had any type of even remote access to kind of pop culture, right? And who articulated a Marxist perspective, right? Like Zizek, David Harvey, Richard Wolff. And it's sort of like, I don't know. It's like Mom, Dad, and Joker or something. I don't know. Some type of interesting.
I'm more worried that David Harvey would just join sides with Richard Wolff and attack me. They're pretty good buddies, actually. They go on each other's show a lot. And
yeah, I heard this little prick David Grishko was talking shit about you. Maybe we should roll up to Brooklyn and throw him in a river.
I think there should be a comic book of David Griscom going on a journey to take on both of these guys.
I think there should be a comic book, and then they teach him like the secret alchemical arts, and then we all like join forces and go like, I don't know, expropriate Goldman Sachs together or something. That would be a good comic book series.
Well, actually, that's what we should do. We should have a gang that hangs out around Wall Street, the three of us, right? And we just sort of hang around like the stock exchange when people leave and like intimidate people. Like that's better than us fighting each other. It's like
so it's like that scene in the superhero movie where it's like Wolf's like, "Who brought the little prick?" And Harvey's like, "I thought he was with you." And you're just like, "Guys, I want to fight Goldman.
Let me at him. Let me go.
Let me do it. Do you really have the discipline? What it takes?"
I have to get like a graduate degree at CUNY.
Yeah.
It's a montage.
Do you read Capital properly, or are you going to be whining and watching YouPorn in a day after? It's a serious work, you little fuckhead. This isn't talking shit on some podcast. I mean, it is, but it's a lot more than that. Guys, as always, want to thank all of you who have become patrons. We continue to grow. Join us today, patreon.com/TMBS. Like us on iTunes. We have a ton of likes and reviews there that helps get the word out. Subscribe to and spread the new YouTube channel. Not exactly sure what we're going to do next week for the year-long anniversary of the show, but I do want to just thank everybody. We have gotten off to an incredible start in this whole mission. And we're really proud of the content we're doing. We're really appreciative of all of you, the numbers growing, the energy growing, everything else. And obviously, Matt and David and the whole team helped from the beginning. Griscom, I'll just say, he came through a friend. I was out having drinks with Luke Mayville, who's a brilliant guy who does really important organizing work for Medicaid expansion in Idaho, and is also has a teaching position at Columbia right now. Luke and I became friends in Turkey in 2007, and we talked about Obama, another person that I've had the Jay-Z Nas argument with, another person who has been very unpleasant about that argument recently. And we talked about any number of things, and also in some ways shared some very similar backgrounds, in some ways really didn't, and built a great friendship. And several months ago he said, I've got this little prick who has a hard-on for Richard Wolff. You think he can come hang out at the studio? No, not at all. He said glowing things about David. I said, of course. And David obviously has joined us in our militia and has been an incredible addition to the show. And we're moving forward on all fronts. And we appreciate everybody who's with us and joining us more and more day by day. We'll see you in the post-game, patrons.